Welcome back to episode 8 of Page 94, the Private Eye podcast, now officially with more episodes than this joke will comfortably accommodate. My name is Andrew Hunter-Murray, and this week we will be talking to Michael Heath, the legendary irascible cartoonist who is celebrating 60 years of drawing funny things. But before that, readers of the magazine may have noticed that there was a huge piece in the back of this week's issue on who actually owns Britain. In total, there is a chunk of the country the size of Surrey, which is owned from outside or by foreign-registered companies and by various parties who would rather keep their identities secret for whatever reason. I spoke to two of the Eye's investigative team about how exactly they found this out and what we can do about it. Here they are. So, I'm here with Richard Brooks and Christian Eriksson, who've both been investigating foreign land ownership and dodgy estate planning, basically, all over the country. Is that a fair summation of what's been going on?
Yeah, it is. But just to be clear, the land is very much England. This is England's very green, very pleasant land, thousands of acres of it, owned by offshore companies.
Exactly how many thousand acres are we talking about here?
We're not sure of the total, but we have found out that since 1999, 490,000 acres have been bought up by companies based in tax havens. That's a pretty big area. That's bigger than Greater London, and it's bigger than Surrey.
And I think it said in the article there were, 97,500 properties which fall into this category, which is owned by, say it again, is it foreign companies?
These are foreign registered companies.
Okay.
Yeah. Most of them are in tax havens like Jersey, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Panama, all the usual suspects. And they can be the huge country estates that give you this large number, this large acreage, or they can be individual houses, often in, super prime properties in London.
Okay, so Christian, if we know that these are owned by foreign-owned companies or foreign-registered companies, do we know who owns the companies?
It's often very difficult to determine exactly who owns these companies, but we've managed to track down a few telling examples using other public databases. For example, Companies House or the electoral roll via 192. Often you can get some clues as to who really owns these estates.
What kind of people are we talking about who do own the estates? I know that they're going to be very wealthy people, obviously, but is it British citizens who nonetheless control these foreign-registered companies? Is it all sorts of people?
Quite often it's British citizens. Sometimes it's very blue-blooded British citizens. We have descendants of Robert Cecil, Viscount Cranbourne, owning vast tracts of England through offshore companies. Sometimes it's very rich overseas business people. We have a Swiss foreign exchange dealer who, via an offshore company, owns a little village, a whole village in Buckinghamshire, which is the sort of chocolate box English village used as the backdrop for Midsummer Murders and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
So Midsummer is owned by a foreign-registered company held in trust for a Swiss foreign exchange dealer.
That's right. It's a company called Hambledon Estates Limited. It's registered in the British Virgin Islands. You don't see many palm trees, though, on Midsummer Murders.
What's the advantage to doing this?
Well, there are a number of advantages. It's quite difficult to actually determine precisely why each of the owners have structured their estates in this particular way. The kinds of reasons usually range from your typical tax avoidance to
a classic
to avoiding inheritance tax, or in some cases, these structures can be used by those with dubious wealth to hide.
There was something in the piece about an arms dealer. Oh, that's right, Prince Bandar. Who's Prince Bandar?
Prince Bandar was the main fixer on the Al Yamama deal, the corruption-riddled BAE Systems deal with Saudi Arabia in the 80s. And he owns an estate called Glimpton Park through a Jersey company. That's in the Cotswolds, which is a popular location for not just for arms dealers but for offshore companies as well. As well as Top Gear presenters and News International journalists. Also, I rather enjoy the thing about Lord Rothermere. I believe that he himself is involved to a certain extent in this. Is that right? Yeah, the Daily Mail proprietor is a big landowner. He controls, we reckon, about 300 acres of land through offshore companies. Okay, so 300 is quite a small number, it would seem, wouldn't it? I don't know where you live,
It's
Andy,
more
but-
acres than I've got. I'm just saying, but you hear about these. Sorry, yeah, I mean the total is 490,000 acres. So I suppose compared with that, it seems smaller. But okay.
Yeah, he's not one of the biggest landowners, but in fact, that 300 acres is made up of quite a bit of farmland, but also some very, very small areas, like a parking space in Kensington is owned through an offshore company. That's probably 0.0 something acres. But it's in there.
I'm sure it's valuable though if it's a parking space in Kensington.
I think it is. I think it's worth six figures.
It is kind of amazing, the amount of the country that is owned by not individuals but by firms. You don't really think of these lovely estates as being owned by companies, specifically not companies registered in the British Virgin Islands. That seems strange.
It is very strange, and it prevents us getting a full picture of who owns England and who owns Britain. Because although we can sometimes identify who's behind them, often you can't, and often that's the whole reason. Many of the 97,000 offshore company-owned properties in England are owned through those structures precisely so that you can't find out who owns them. And not just so that we, public or journalists, can't find out, but also sometimes so that law enforcers can't find out. So it puts British property in very dubious hands sometimes.
The article closes with a line by David Cameron, who promised to break down the walls of corporate secrecy, which conceals this kind of thing. But actually, even if the plans that he's got are enacted, only the UK companies which own these properties will be made public. Is that right?
That's right. David Cameron's saying that he's going to open up British companies so that they have to declare their beneficial owners. But that only applies to UK companies. It doesn't apply to companies in all the overseas territories, all the tax havens.
Yeah. Would he have control over that?
Political control of the tax havens is such that, yes, if he wanted to,
Okay,
he could force them to do that. He's chosen not to. He's leaving them to decide whether to do it for themselves. And surprisingly, they've decided not to.
What, if anything, can be done about this? We seem to be at an impasse now, where so many properties are held overseas that it's sort of impossible to know who owns them. Is there any way back from that?
Well, the first thing you could do is insist that any company that owns land in Britain declares its beneficial ownership. That would be very simple to do. You could say that you can't register land unless you declare the beneficial owner. But there's no signs of that happening yet. Beyond that, I think it does take us into the whole area of tax haven companies and how not just when they own land, but when they do any business, we really ought to know who the beneficial owners are, because at the moment it's just a complete escape from any accountability at all.
I must say, it doesn't make very comforting reading, if I can put it that way. The fact that these sort of vast tracts of land are all being held overseas, it's a little bit dispiriting, I'd say. Because I think we all aspire to own 300 acres of Wiltshire or a parking space in Kensington. So it's kind of very sad to read.
Yeah, I think it's pretty sad because we've only covered a very, very, very small sample in this week's issue.
What comes next, basically?
Well, this is only really the first step. As you rightly say, this is a very, very small sample of all of the offshore estates and properties held in sunny Caribbean tax havens or otherwise. There's plenty more in the pipeline, but I'm afraid we can't reveal too many details as yet. But suffice to say that there should be some interesting stories.
So as you go for your country walk next weekend and you stare at the gorgeous vistas of England, you'll never know whether you're actually looking at something owned from, some sunny island tax haven in the Caribbean. It is a bit disappointing.
That is a nice way of thinking that you're saving money on your next Caribbean break, isn't it? You can just go for a walk in the Cotswolds instead, and you'll really be in the British Virgin Islands. So maybe not so discouraging.
As the rain lashes your face, you can imagine. And in fact, actually be in the British Virgin Islands.
Yeah. Richard Brooks and Christian Eriksen there showing that sunny foreign climes are much more attainable than you'd think. Now, Michael Heath is one of the Eye's longest-standing cartoonists. Actually, he's been drawing since before the Eye existed. And last week he celebrated 60 years as a cartoonist. I went to interview him, and I think it's only fair to warn listeners with nervous dispositions that they might want to just go and make a cup of tea or something while this is happening. Before speaking to him, however, here is Nick Newman, one of the Eye's senior cartoonists and cartoon wranglers, to explain exactly who Michael Heath is, why he's so grumpy, and why he's so good. Here's Nick.
Michael Heath is probably one of the greatest cartoonists living, I would say. He's just celebrated about 60 years in journalism, which is a phenomenal achievement for some of us who aren't quite 60 ourselves. He's been drawing since 1954, and I think what marks Michael out from all the rest of us is that he is unbelievably prolific right from the early days. When I first met him in the 1980s, I don't think there was a single newspaper in the country which didn't carry his work, and the reason is because it's of such a consistently high standard. The other thing that I think marks him out from the rest of us is that he is, I think, the closest we've got in cartooning terms to Picasso, in that right from the early days in the 1950s when he started off, he could draw beautifully. He could draw in any style you wanted, and his early work sort of rather looked a bit like Quentin Blake's, and it's very fresh, spontaneous, but very charming. And having done that, he's sort of gone off and spiralled off and created this sort of world of his own, which defies perspective and all the rules of drawing, and he just starts drawing and it finishes up. Somehow people's arms are longer, one arm's longer than the other. It's a remarkable feat that he pulls off.
There's one which actually made it into the recent cartoons book, which is of his... Is it A Day in the Life of a Cartoonist?
Yes, and it starts off with a miserable-looking man getting out of bed, listening to depressing news, and his partner saying Tracy Emin makes real money. Then he gets a demand from the Inland Revenue, sits at his drawing desk with a big balloon above his head saying blank. Meanwhile, his partner's saying, I'm leaving you. Then, bingo, he has a funny idea, and it's like a light bulb above his head. And he goes, ha, 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 ha. Posts it off to the cartoon editor of Funny Mag. The cartoon editor of the Funny Mag is blind, and he's sitting there in his office with a golden retriever. And he has a reject slip which says, your gag is not funny, Mr. So-called Funny Man. And that is everything that cartoonists sort of feel that's their life. You've got hope, despair, ecstasy, misery, and Michael's done it in perfectly.
Without further ado, let's hear from Michael. I should warn you that due to an extravagant technological cock-up, the sound quality on the next bit is very bad, so apologies for that. I started off by asking Michael about how he got into the cartooning game in the first place.
Well, I started in 1955. My first drawings were published in Melody Maker magazine, and I think that's 1955.
Okay. How did you start in it?
Well, that's what I wanted to do, I think. I couldn't do anything else. I had no education. The war was over, obviously. I had to get a job, as everyone had to in those days, otherwise you were pariah in society. It never occurred to us not to get a job somehow, but what could I do? My father was an illustrator of children's comics, Cowboys and Indians, and he hated doing it. He was a teacher, really, art teacher, but he had been talked into it. But I saw he was making some sort of living out of it, not a good one. And I thought, well, I'll do that.
You say he disliked it. Why did you start? If you saw him not enjoying it?
I saw, well, often things come from, most things, it seems to me, come from defeat. You could often have a horrible holiday, but that's the one you remember and talk about, make other people laugh about. Whereas a good one is just boring. You say, I had a really terrific holiday, you just lay in the sun all day and just had... kind of, and that's it. But if you had a real nightmare, a snake cut through the bath and the toilet got blocked and you were knocked over and that sort of thing. That's fun. And remember that, that sort of fun. So things come out of where you don't think they're going to come out and also vanish. They come out. So when you least expect it, things change. And for reasons I do not know anything about, and I cannot remember, I wished to be a cartoonist like the New Yorker cartoons. Not Punch, not English, but New Yorker. For some reason I'd seen a copy or somebody brought me one. That was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a top New Yorker cartoonist. They were then funny.
Okay.
In so much that Americans were funny, the movies they made were often very, very witty and very, very funny. We weren't. The English were very slow and boring. And cartoons in Punch were also very slow and boring. And not really interesting. I wanted to be Peter Arno, who was a top cartoonist for the New Yorker magazine. And in those days, he had the adoration of a pop star like it. Right. Girls chasing him, a car, he could play piano very well, jazz and all the rest of it. And I lived in New York, and New York then was considered a sexy, wonderful place. So I thought that was it. I'd be a cartoonist. And I loved jazz. I don't talk about it anymore because people hate it and regard you as mentally ill if you like jazz. But it was only just a particular period coming out of New York, 1947 to 55 maybe.
Yeah.
And it was Monk, Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker.
One of your first published cartoons was of a jazz trio. That's
right,
what you
Thelonious
started
Monk
with.
Trio. I thought, that's it. I want to be like them. Not only am I a cartoonist, but like they were. Witty, fast, enormously clever. No one could copy them. Nothing like you hear now. And I thought, that was it. This joke must be funny, look like it's been done extremely quickly, witty, hopefully, and assuming an audience which had half a brain.
Okay.
Something you can't do now.
Well, what kind of people do you like to draw, if there is a theme among them? Is there a kind of person who you think it's funnier to draw?
I don't know. I suppose the reality of it all is that I'm being sneaky, and I'm drawing people that I don't like, or find irritating, or they, idiotic, or take themselves seriously, or in my case, they are happy, which I find almost indescribably difficult to deal with. They don't know anything, and they're proud of it. And nowadays, since 1950, they're encouraged to be idiotic, and you can be a teenager from the age of 16 up until about 45 now.
There's a cartoon of yours in the latest issue of Private Eye.
That's right. They are on. I mean, I didn't make it up. They're on kids' scooters.
Yeah, it's of two. We should say it's of two sort of very, very elderly teenagers almost. They've got tattoos. They're on scooters.
45-year-old men. They've got paunches and they're on scooters. And they've got. But that came to me about 3 weeks ago because I thought everyone's got a gadget. They're all talking about fucking gadgets and things they collect and rubbish they talk and things that they look at, which is all drivel and things blowing each other up. Terminator 1, 2, 3 and 4 and now Jurassic Park, for the really intelligent. I was brought up because I was, I suppose, an inverted or some peculiar snob. None of that. We looked at early German movies and silent stuff and French movies, and so I guess I'm a snob looking back at it. But I never went with the flow, and I suppose that was because I had no education. I was very shy, but I didn't like what other people liked. Who taught me that? I don't know. I suppose my mother or whatever or father. I thought you could put something down about these wretched people who took themselves seriously about whatever it is they do, getting married or clothes or whatever they do. They do it with an all. I mean, when I was doing Great Balls of Today, I put them all in there. And what I enjoy doing is putting the clothes in, the hair in, and the way they looked. So if you look them up now, in the late 50s and 60s and 70s, you can see how people were boring about Tom Stoppard, and you check out the clothing. And that I thought was good, because I remember at Punch magazine, when you look at bound copies, you could say, good Lord, how interesting they wore that, or they looked like that, or their hair was like that, that must be a flapper of 1922. And I've always changed my clothing along with the public, because it seemed to me that the hell on earth to me was to end up like Thirlwell and do the same thing every drawing.
Right. There's one classic description of a cartoonist, which is someone who sits at home all day staring at the wall, alternately barking with laughter and howling with despair.
Right.
Correct?
I've heard that, I guess. The best one I hear is the editor, Harold Ross of New Yorker magazine, when it was brilliant, blah, 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 and he was a brilliant editor. And he said, I love this guy's work, this Critic, whoever it was he was talking about. He said, but I don't want to ever see him, because I've met cartoonists and they give me sinking feelings. So, no, that's about right.
Why is that? Why are cartoonists gloomy?
I don't go along with that. I mean, I really don't go along with that.
Okay.
I keep people in fits, if you'll forgive me saying so. I'm only saying that because you're saying I'm gloomy. I'm not gloomy. I'm much aware of... I mean, if you had your wits about you and you're intelligent enough, you'd have shot yourself ages ago. Because out there, it's horrific. What things are happening, and half-wits doing things, and awful things are happening in Soho and all the rest of it, and be pulling everything down they can and build rubbish. And the whole world's being taken over by drivel. They are, by nature, neurotic. I think you are neurotic to want to be a cartoonist. It's a form of shyness, and you can put people down without actually standing and talking at them.
Okay.
It's a private vice.
But it's one that you then show off in the pages of magazines and newspapers. And
well, I do. I mean, I put it in, and if you get it, you get it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't, you don't. I can't help that. But I'm saying, look at these cunts on children's scooters. I mean, they're 45. In my time, they'd have been in the wall, blown apart. But the people I've always known who make me laugh, people like Francis Bacon and all the rest of it, have been stitches. They didn't want to, but I mean, they were funny. They were frightening, but I mean, they were. I can't draw, all that sort of thing. They'd say to me. I would, if I I employ cartoonists. If I like them, I employ them.
Yeah.
I do not say to them, do it like this or change it like that. I just leave them to their own devices. Like my jazz people, you didn't go up to Charlie Parker and say, no, that's not quite right. You didn't say to Monk, hang on, you've hit the wrong note. You just said you like them and you pay them to work for you. If you know you've got someone, you don't go up to Ernest Hemingway and say, look, what are you talking about? What's this Spanish nonsense? What? Sorry? Fish? What are you talking about? But I can't teach cartooning. You can't teach it. I've tried it. You cannot teach it.
Yeah. Do you think there is a future in cartooning?
No. Unless something happens. There are some new ones on the scene.
Yeah.
They're not tested yet. They haven't had to draw while someone's died in front of them, or their wife left them, or their children are sick, and you're having to draw because the editor wants it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you've got to learn to draw whatever your circumstances are. Colds, illness, divorce, separation, all the miseries of life. You've got to go, oh, right, yes, you're fine. Oh, right, and you can't say, shit, I'm not doing this, like Tracy. You say, I'm not doing fuck backwards again. I'm exhausted. So, well, there's £50 million. Enjoy that. You can't do that. Or if I went to the editor of the Mail on Sunday and said, I've got this dreadful headache, I don't think I can possibly do anything. He'd say, well, you're fired. You see, I mean, well, I've had a nervous breakdown, or things have happened to me. Awful things have happened to me. Truly dreadful. I'm sure they've happened to other people too. But you can't say, you can't ever bring it up. You can't say to them, do you mind? I mean, I just don't feel quite up to it. In a funny way, that's therapy in a way, because you override your neurotic whatever thing, maybe. Maybe it's good for you. And that's what you've got to do there. You've got to draw whatever the circumstances. Yeah. And they're awful quite often. Quite dreadful. But there you are.
But you clearly feel the need to do it, though.
Oh, what else do you do? Television? Yeah, really? I think not.
Fair enough. Michael Heath, thank you very much.
Is that it? Oh, my God, I haven't started.
Nick Newman and Michael Heath there. Well, that's everything for this week's edition of Page 94. If you've enjoyed it, please do tell your friends, or write a review on iTunes, or tweet about it, or whatever you like, or just sit quietly and don't worry about it. It's not your job. Either way, we hope you've enjoyed this week, and we'll be back with another before too long. Thank you very much, and goodbye.